Thank you, John. I'm Valerie Haggard. I am a person in recovery, and I have been clean from alcohol and drugs since 1998. And if you can't do math like me, that's almost 23 years. I was 23 when I got sober. And I'm a writer. I write memoir, creative nonfiction. I write online, and I've published a couple of books. And I have chosen to write about my recovery, but it was a big decision. It took a long time. I teach creative writing as well, and I'll pass.
Thanks.
I'm Honesty Liller. I am a woman in recovery since May 27, 2007. Recovery rocks. It's given me a life that I never even dreamed of in a million years. I am a proud alum of the McShin Foundation, and I am the CEO of that very organization that helped to save my life, as well as best-selling author of Scattered Pink. I have some books for free in the back if you want one. Mom, wife, my life rocks because of recovery, so that's me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jan. I am a survivor of addiction in long-term recovery, which means that I have a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I want to keep it. And my recovery started in 1987, which means that I've been sober for 36 years. Thank you. And I recover out loud because I don't know any other way to do it.
Me neither.
So it's that simple for me.
I'm Jimmy Christmas. I've been a person in long-term recovery since 1992. I'm a clinical social worker. I run a behavioral health company here in Richmond, Virginia. And I can remember the first time I was on a pink cloud. I was working for an agency, and I was excited to be in recovery. I was excited to have a job and a mental health professional working with people recovering from addiction. And I remember coming out at that moment, and people just looked at me and they just kept it going. And it felt like a sense of indifference. And what I did is I went and talked to it about my sponsor, and I had to remember the principle of anonymity and that I have a right to disclose and not to disclose at any time. But now I make a choice to live recovery out loud.
Thanks so much. I think the first question that I have is, when in your recovery did you first disclose to a large public setting about your recovery? So outside of recovery circles, but inside, in spheres like this or in professional settings.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was 15 years sober, so it took a long time. I was teaching writing, and I was in, I think it was the time of my anniversary, and I write in class along with everyone else. We're writing about our experiences, our lives. I loved what Leslie said earlier about it's not writing about something beautiful, it's about surviving, it's about telling the truth, and that's how we write in my workshops. So of course I was writing about my anniversary, and I really had this desire to share it, but I was very conflicted. I knew that I didn't want to be put out the idea of recovery and then have a bad name, make a bad name for recovery, because I was like, I don't know. And these people who were in my workshop said, you're at 15 years, you're probably fine. And they weren't in recovery, but I was like, you know what? Maybe I am. So I'm just going to share about it. And it was a beautiful experience. And I haven't looked back. It's been only positive for me since then. Yeah.
I got a different story. I did probably my first year in recovery, to be honest with you. At McShin, we teach individuals and the humans that we serve how to advocate pretty early on in their recovery. I had Aaron Chikarsky and Tom Codere come down from Faces. They were in Faces and Voices of Recovery when I was living in McShin, so 100 years ago, and they taught me, the difference about being an advocate and, being anonymous early on in my recovery. So as far as dates, I can't remember yesterday,
No,
but I have been talking to policymakers and been at Capitol, on the Hill since I was new to recovery. So within my first year of recovery.
Similar to honesty, I mean, I hit the ground running, and part of it for me, I was in the brain injury recovery community before I came to the addiction recovery space. And back then, in order to get funding, universities and others had to have these things called advisory committees. Yes. And they needed certain people on advisory committees. And so I checked off a lot of boxes, right? So I'm a woman, I was black, I am black. It's not a past tense. I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm gay. So I was like just checking them off. I'm in recovery, and so they got a lot of mileage off of me. But being who I am, I started speaking up. And one of the things that I've always firmly believed is that if anyone was able to get the quality and type of treatment that I was afforded, that everybody would have an amazing life. I mean, certainly some people are going to die because we have a disease, but most people don't get the type and quality of medical treatment that I got. And so that is why I continue to be an advocate, because, it works and it's amazing.
Yeah, my experience was around 1999. I'd already been clean for several years. I was already working in a community service board. And in 1999, Virginia passed the burial crime bill, which was this really broad list of crimes that prohibited people with those crimes from working in the mental health and substance abuse field. I had people who were both in recovery as well as people, supervisors that I was working with, that really believed that I could be an asset to the community and speak to the General Assembly about the benefits of modifying the burial crimes to let folks who have shown their worthiness work in the field of recovery, addiction services, and mental health services. So it's really been interesting, and I've been in that path and for that cause since I've been in recovery.
Thank you. So, Honesty, I have a question for you, because you've written this memoir, and that's a very, very public way of disclosure.
Public, yeah.
So they say in 12-step recovery that sometimes our darkest moments can be used for good, and that sharing them can make somebody with a similar experience feel like they are not alone. In chapter 6 of your book, you write about your experience of being in active use during your first pregnancy. You wrote in the chapter, "This chapter was the most painful to write, but today I am very proud. I am a very proud, decent mom because I was able to forgive myself." Can you talk a little bit about the differences between disclosing these kinds of truths in recovery spaces versus disclosing them where they can be quoted and reinterpreted by anyone with a library card or an Amazon Prime account?
Sure. You got tissues? Okay. Yeah. So that, like, if you're out to write a book, get my information, I can help you. It's hard. But the reality of it is that one chapter is a huge part of my story. My daughter was born substance exposed. I used my whole pregnancy, heroin specifically. And being able to be a woman, the negative outlook on addiction was 10 times harder for a woman that was addicted, specifically women that are pregnant. And it still is, unfortunately, today. We're trying to break those barriers. In writing that, I cried my eyes out writing that chapter. But the reality of it is, if I don't tell my story, I'm selfish. I feel like there's so many women out there that are pregnant and using right now that can get a hope shot from that. And it's hard. Being a parent is the hardest thing I've ever done. I got 2 of those people now. So a 13-year-old boy, and then my daughter's now 21, and she's beautiful and amazing. And, but being able to be a voice of women out there is something I'm very passionate about. I'm going to do it forever until I leave this planet. But I think we need to give women a little bit of a break, especially ones that are pregnant and have substance use disorder. And we're actually doing that in McShen. We're opening our first pregnant and parenting recovery home for women on Monday. Yay. Yeah. We're in for a journey, for sure. But we actually just named it Destiny House after my daughter. So anyway, so like our stories are our stories, right? And it took me a minute to like really understand that in early recovery, but then once you start advocating for change and know what you're saying. So, not just going up to the podium and just kind of sharing, a war story, because that's just not really my jam.
Yeah.
But really educating the community as a whole that women can recover and women can, have babies and be awesome moms.
Yeah.
So if that
Thank you
answers
so
your
much.
question, yeah.
You definitely did. So I have a question specifically for Valley.
Okay.
In your book, Surrender Your Weapons, Writing to Heal, there's a chapter called How to Survive Public Humiliation.
Yeah.
And you give readers 11 bullet points, not 12. We could have done 12 bullet
Could
points,
have.
nice and even. Number one is wake up at a fancy hotel and put on a nice dress before venturing out into your day. You have a better chance of surviving public humiliation if you are wearing actual clothes, which is, I think, true. And, you're true to form. And then number two is feel really confident and happy when you sit down at a table with microphones and other panelists in front of a huge room of friends and strangers, because what's the worst that can happen if you've made it this far?
Oh, yeah.
So my question for you is, what is the worst that has happened in settings like this for you?
Oh, that's such a great question. Probably the incident I was writing about. Actually, if you're a writer, you have the superpower because you know that anything that's bad that's happening right now will become a story. So that kind of helps you get through it. They say in the writing world, bad life equals good writing. So I don't set out to create disastrous stories on purpose anymore, although I definitely spent a lot of time doing that. Like, we'll write about this near-death adventure soon. But as I'm experiencing, whether it's shame, humiliation, grief, there's always this part of me that's kind of writing the story as it's happening. And that, it's like if you know that you can turn one of the darkest, hardest, loneliest times that you're experiencing into something that might possibly help someone else, it just softens the whole thing a little bit. It takes some of the edges off. I mean, not that it doesn't still feel excruciating,
Yes.
but you know that you're going to use that for something else.
That there's a purpose to it.
There's a purpose for it. It makes everything better. I wanted to share too, when I was initially saying it took me 15 years to come out as a person in recovery, I forgot to mention that I also was running a creative writing program for kids. And I worked in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And I taught summer camp. I had my own summer camp. So I was very involved with children. And so the idea of coming out as an alcoholic and drug addict was a lot scarier to me than it would have been had I just been teaching adults. And I just want to say, when I finally made that decision, it's, these young people are becoming teenagers, they're becoming adults, they're facing all of the same things I faced. And having my students, maybe a little later in their lives, read my writing, read about my alcoholism and addiction and recovery process has been helpful for them too. And I didn't get any backlash from parents that I thought I might have. At least they didn't come up and tell me so to my face. So I just wanted to add that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
And this is for Jan and Jimmy. From my experience, having been connected to RAMS and recovery since 2013, there's something really amazing about young people in recovery. And the way that they are open about their recovery journeys and are not carrying around backpacks of shame and regret, which I certainly carried around. And both of you got into recovery at a similar age to the students that are part of RAMS and recovery. So I guess I want to know what it was like for you to find recovery at a time where there weren't the kinds of supports that are available to people of that age now. And then also, one of the things, you're both in the field, so, do you have advice for people entering the workforce, regardless of whether or not what field they're in, about the benefits or hazards of disclosure of recovery status?
Yeah. I think Jan could agree that when we got clean, it probably wasn't this many people clean in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous in this area in those years, where, we could probably fill a whole city right now. I was very fortunate. I took a lot of suggestions when I got here. I had the ability to go back came here to VCU to the School of Social Work, and I found some mentors, some coaches. I had a sponsor, support group, people in my life who were cheerleaders, who were living the recovery lifestyle. Honestly, works for McShin. John Shinholzer was one of my greatest coaches, greatest mentors, greatest advocates, greatest cheerleaders, who encouraged me to go back to school, who encouraged me to live out loud, who encouraged me to do things. When I came back to VCU, I was just so excited. One of the most important things they tell us, or one of the most important things I got when I got clean, was they told me to go after my recovery like I went after my drugs. And anybody who knows or even works with people, we hear the stories or we live the stories, and we know that we had this single-mindedness about getting our drugs, finding ways and means to get more. And so I took that and I ran with it. I came back to school. I joined the VCU Outdoor Adventure Program, so I was leading camping trips out in the wilderness. I was rock climbing. I learned how to play golf, martial arts, things that I still do now. Being in recovery, I was hearing about people traveling, starting their own businesses, becoming leaders of the industries that they decided to be in. And then what happened was people, my predecessors, charged me with becoming that same mentor and coach to give back to individuals. And as we've always heard the cliches, the best way to know more about what you do is to give it back to other people. So whether it's in 12-step language, I can only keep what I have by giving it away, or when the student is ready, when the teacher appears, it's the same metaphors that help this transmission of knowledge and experience. And this beautiful thing, when I came in here this morning, I saw Rachel. Rachel and I greeted each other, and she reminded me that we used to go to Tom's house to a book reading thing, and my heart just got filled up with that experience, because it was a beautiful experience. That is another thing that I hold on to when things look dark sometimes, because sometimes in recovery it gets dark. So it's all of these memories and experiences that I have put together. It's the constant giving back to my community. Whether you're in recovery or not, my job is to continue to be an asset to my community, to be a beacon of hope in my community. And that's what I hold on to today. That's what I think that was my mission when I first got here. And you guys helped me continue to hone that and sharpen it as I've been around here.
So I was 22 when I finally began sustained recovery. It wasn't my first time. Having gone to treatment, the United States Military Academy, I was a cadet at West Point, and back then even they treated it as a medical issue, and so they sent me to treatment, and it was 40 some odd days of hanging out with senators, congressmen, very high-ranking people who were public servants, were military service. And we used to get in this bus, and we would go all over Washington, D.C. to meetings. And so again, for me, I was just immediately thrust into this group of people whose lives depended on it, whose livelihoods depended on it. And so because of the level of accountability and people looking at us, it was something that was really important. Except it wasn't important to me. Fast forward, I went to treatment again, and I was in treatment for 17 months, which I now know is a very long time, but I needed each and every day of the time that I was there. And I remember a couple of kind of turning points for me when I was in treatment. And one was I had a therapist who I didn't think much of, but one of the things that she said to me was that if I chased my recovery in the same way that I chased my addiction, she said, if you put 10% of that effort and energy, that you will be an amazing woman. And I believed her. And today I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, I am an amazing woman. and so that was part of my pursuit. But through this time period, again, I've always recovered out loud, and I'm a clergy person. And so, you know, for a lot of others who are clergy people, it is not safe for them to say that they're in recovery. And what that looked like when I was going through all of the background work and they were asking lots of questions, where I think my recovery is an asset and it's going to bring a tremendous amount to my ministry, those were all red flags for people who had been to treatment before and some of those other questions. And so, you know, having that, what we did early on was, you know, it kind of evolved into what collegiate recovery programs look like. I mean, there were 6 or 7 of us, and we went everywhere together. We would go to a meeting wherever there was a meeting. We'd go to the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting, and we'd eat meals together. And so, you know, we didn't stop doing things that young people do. I can remember working in a treatment center, and they're like, you know, you can't go to concerts, and you can't do this. And it's like, who wants recovery then if you can't do things that are meaningful? So we did it with a plan, with accountability. I mean, we like to dance. I'm a bad dancer, but I like to dance. And so we would go to the club, and we had a rule that when one of us was ready to go, we all went. We had a rule that if you needed to go to the bathroom, you didn't get to go by yourself. And so we did those things in order to be able to have a life worth living. I think another piece for me is being able to, I was not a church basement fan, and I would come back from smoky meetings, and I'm like, okay, I smoked 5 packs of cigarettes today. And the people would just tell me to keep coming. And so I did, and I would insult them, and, you know, and they would tell me that they spilt more alcohol or used more drugs than I would ever use, and that pissed me off. So I was going to go and prove them wrong, and all of those kinds of things. And they just say, just keep coming. I'm like, all right. And so I did. And I hated meetings. I hated them. And then I found meetings that I liked. When I was in DC, my home group meeting was called the Yays and Nays meeting, and it is in the United States Capitol. So every Tuesday morning, a bunch of drunks and a bunch of people with addiction went to the U.S. Capitol and showed our little IDs and walked by the police who hated us because they knew who we were, and they weren't fond of, but right, that's the people's house. And we would go to our meeting, and our meeting was right next to, you could see the chamber. And I remember being there for a State of the Union address that was going to happen that evening. And so those kinds of things taught me that I didn't need to be ashamed of myself. And we would go for breakfast after the meeting to the members' dining room, right? And so, you know, some congressman or senator would be sitting right next to us having some busy power meeting, and, you know, we're talking about whatever we had just shared about in the meeting or what was going on in our lives. And so, you know, that really helped me understand and shape that there's no shame. That, like I said earlier, this really is a no-fault illness. I was talking with somebody earlier, and it comes up quite a bit for people who are in, I call them safety-sensitive positions. So they're often physicians, you know, airline pilots, clergy, that I'm at an age where I just don't care. So we'll say that. And I'm going to do what I want to do. So some of those folks cannot, right? And there are some people whose jobs depend upon, you know, being able to keep that job. I don't care. So I get to advocate on your behalf, right? Because I recover out loud, and because I get to go places and do things that other people don't often get to do. I get to say a thing, and I will always say a thing. I had a woman who I worked with in the HEART program call me a couple weeks ago, having a difficult time here in Richmond trying to get services for somebody. And I listened, and it was like, wow. And then at the end of it, I said, you called me because you knew I was going to do something about it. And she said, I sure did. So as I hear people's stories, somebody back there, I remember earlier, came up and said, gosh, I've been told that it is a death sentence in my career if I talk about my recovery. And I said, well, I gotcha, because I'm going to talk about my recovery. And I do a lot of consulting work, and I get to be in spaces with the decision makers and people who have a tremendous amount of influence.
Yeah, and that is the core of that question, really, is like there are people who, the stigma is real, and people carry that, right? So I'm in an academic setting, it hasn't harmed me, but it could certainly harm people. We've had students that have been in the School of Social Work who do not disclose for particular reasons, and to me, it's sad that they can't, but it's understandable that they don't. So we definitely, there's a lot of work to do, and Recovering Out Loud is part of that. We have lots of time for questions. I know that Tom has a particular question that he's like, maybe I'll moderate because I have a question. So I'm going to give the mic to Tom, and then we'll open the field to people in the audience.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for what you've shared so far. So the origin of this panel in the first place was the conference, I guess, 7 years ago at this time. And I'll preface this by saying a couple of the spaces that I have in my recovery been the most furious and rageful. One in particular was on this campus in this room, not at this conference. And it was a moment that there was a large gathering organized by folks that work, a variety of folks that work in the carceral setting, whether that's district attorneys to law enforcement, other law enforcement folks, and they had a whole conference, conference number 6082 about, silent no more. We're gonna end, the opiate epidemic, realizing this 30 years too late. And it was a whole day, and there was one person who got to speak for 10 minutes who was in recovery. And I looked around the room, and there were at least 20 professionals who had, advanced degrees who were in recovery in the room who were not asked to speak. And it was just infuriating, in part because it was on my home turf, and I know that and then another moment that really kind of made me think a lot connected to that was at this conference, and Jimmy was on a panel, and I asked him a question that was like, you basically have to self-disclose. And he said, gosh, we're always being asked to self-disclose at these things. And I think it's always stood out in my mind because, there was my perspective, which is like, here are my heroes and mentors who I desperately need to recover out loud in the spaces that I have to navigate and to stand up for me in the way that you all have described standing up for me. And also, this man has built a tremendous career and has always, or in many, many of those spaces, been questioned about objectivity, about different aspects of being in a person in recovery in this profession where we're supposed to help people get into recovery. And it just stood out to me as this tremendous tension that we have in our space and our roles. And so when I thought about this panel, I was like, people really need to hear how you all navigate this, because you're in settings where I would guess that you experience rage, the whole range of emotions as you navigate this and try to make things a little bit better for the next person. So I'd be curious from all of you about kind of how do you navigate that? I mean, I do think advocacy is often about anger, right? And a degree of rage. And so, like, how have you navigated that in your careers in a way that's obviously allowed you all to be tremendously successful, but also in a way that honors who you all are as human beings? So I'm going to start with Jimmy, but I'd love to hear from each of you on that.
Rage against the machine, right? I think I've been in a rage since I've been here. You know, hearing the different stories, working in so many different settings, not being invited to the table where decisions are made, being invited to the tables where decisions are made and not discounted, working for other professionals and organizations that said that they respected and honored recovery, but maybe behind closed doors where people have opinions, they may cynically talk about people in recovery and what they can bring to a professional setting, you know. And, you know, I can tell you, I have to play politics. I just simply have to do. I'm currently, I have a really large organization. I probably have about 150 employees. I do a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring, but I work almost exclusively in the criminal justice system. Now, and it's interesting that the people in the criminal justice system that know I'm in recovery, I was actually outed by other people in the recovery field, you know, and they did it innocently enough, you know, because they do a good job, and that's where they started. They were starting out as recovering people in the field first, representing recovery organizations, and they naturally assumed it was okay to out me simultaneously. And yet, I can tell you, I don't let all of these people know that I'm in recovery. It's not their business. And sometimes, some days are better than none. Some days I'm really ready to wear my recovery out loud. And some days it's about business first. It's about protecting this reputation that I built that really encompasses all 150 of my employees and all of the other clients, patients, consumers, or whatever we want. It protects them too. It helps our programs and services operate well. You know, one of the things I'm in a rage about right now, and somebody and I were talking about justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is about the Opioid Abatement Authority, you know, and I'm not there, but, you know, I wasn't invited to the table, you know, and I work almost exclusively with that target population and have for years, and I'm one of the best in my field at what I do, okay? I know what I do. I work well. I've worked in many sessions, settings. I am a subject matter expert, and I work with a lot of other subject matter experts to do good in our community. So, Tom, thanks for talking about that rage and how some days is simmering and some days is not. Luckily, what we learn in recovery, but also what we should learn in our professional fields is finding those people that I can go talk to that help me make sense. And then what I like to talk about is have a strategy like Jan was talking about to engage these people. Like Jan is an advocate that's living out loud, so maybe Jan is a person. I said, Jan, could you just give me some information about what's going on at Opioid Abatement Authority and how I can be helpful? I'm wise enough now with my gray hair to know that I can't beat up everything. And I like to in my final years of my career as gracefully as possible, but I have stepped on my dingle-dangle many times just trying to rage against the machine, and I didn't get the effect that I wanted. And that's not what I want, because I have a job to do, and it's to protect the public safety. It's to help my folks. Recovery people are my folks, okay? All people are my folks. But recovery people are my folks, and I really hold that dear. So what I try to do is continue to partner with like-minded people who are actually doing the work. Like one of the things, real quick, Honesty mentioned that McShin was starting a pregnant women's program. And I'm gonna tell you guys, that's probably one of the most arduous undertakings that anybody can take. It is a highly risky activity. Lots of us have talked about it, but the logistics just did not seem right. And then these people who probably communicate with funding sources and try to apply for grants and RFPs, and they want you to do it for free. They want you to take a loss a lot of times when you build the program. And what we're talking about quality of work. Because again, these are our people. I have a vested interest in it. It's in my heart, you know? And I think there's probably, I think honestly can talk about where she's had to give and take just to get that program going, because I don't think it's many in our area. Zero. So there's no pregnant woman in program. I think Rubicon used to have one.
RBHA has one. Yeah, but not a recovery house.
Yes.
House.
Because the people that we have to deal with, God bless their souls, right? In their eyes, you know, they're not at ground zero every day. You know, really fighting the war on drugs, trying to make a daily, weekly, and monthly impact. We know they have their jobs, but we have our jobs, and I don't think they really understand it. So I think sometimes, and I can imagine, honestly, and Jan and all these folks who have to, you know, sit at these tables and help make the influence what happens here, you know, we have to manage our race. Maybe we just have to let it simmer or rechannel it in another way. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
So for me, it's about picking my battles, knowing my enemy, doing my homework up front, so that I can present my best self. And one of the things that I do, you know, I get to sit up here, but it's because lots of people have helped me get to sit up here. And so, you know, I meet with staff, I meet with friends, and they keep me grounded because I can go pretty far out. And for a while, I mean, some of it is the evolution of feeling better in my own skin. I returned to college, so I came to, I think John mentioned my very amazingly fancy degree. So I have an International Master's of Science degree in Addiction Studies in a program that there's only one in the whole wide world. And so it lets me get to spaces that other people can't get to. And that was why I did it, not so much to pat myself on the back, more to be able to, you know, it takes 10 years to go from science to practice. And then it takes 10 more years to go from practice to the community. And people are dying. We don't have 20 years, right? And the majority of the science that's there doesn't even get disseminated. So there's just so many holes and gaps, and people's lives depend upon this thing. And so, you know, those are the big things. And I get mad, and, you know, we've got some people here can attest to it. I show up in spaces, and sometimes I remind them or say, I'm not sure you really wanted to invite me. And you did, and I'm going to say something. And you know, I also vote, right? I vote, but my people don't always win. And so, you know, I have to recognize that as well. I think for me, sometimes it's when people say things that is misinformation. Those are mine. You know, they're talking, and it's like, they don't even know what they're talking about. And it often happens, sadly, when I'm in a courtroom. And I don't know how to behave in court at all. So please don't ask me to come with you, because I'm going to say something that I'm not supposed to say, inevitably. And sometimes the man with the fancy costume says, he comes walking toward me and says, you have to be quiet. And I'm like, but this judge is saying something that's not true. And the judge doesn't have a degree in this anyway. He has a degree in something else. But they get to write prescriptions for people's lives. This person is prescribed AA. Really? Wouldn't you get an MD after your name? And so they have a lot of authority and power. And so one of the things that's been really cool is I now get to do things with the Virginia Department of Health, and I'm getting to do things with Virginia Department of Social Services. And there's a guy who's amazing, who works for DSS. I never would have gotten to those tables if it weren't for him, right? So one of the things that he does is he uses his power for good and says, I want to present with Jan. And so I'm getting to go to these spaces and say things to folks who don't understand addiction and recovery, and offer some education to them in a way that they can hear it most of the time. I try, some days I do insult people. I don't make fools of them anymore, because you can't help people change if you make a fool of them. And you can nicely, let them know what they don't know, instead of, some days I'm more polished than others. But I keep coming and I keep showing up and I keep doing my homework. And for me as well, I was talking to somebody earlier and I'm like, you are the next generation, right? I'm getting tired and old and don't care. And now I have a 14-month-old and a 4-month-old that I'm raising. And so, it's going to be up to some of you younger people and some of you who have been around for a while who are finding your sea legs. So, part of why I get to recover out loud is so that y'all get to do so too.
Well said.
So for me, it has really been trial and error throughout all of these years. I've been in recovery almost 16 years. I've been advocating pretty much the first year of my recovery. So some rooms weren't as pretty as the others. But now when people call me to the table or need me, I live by my name, which is honesty. Like, I'm a very authentic woman. Took me a long time to live by my name, but I'm very authentic. And also there's a way of authenticity and being able to present yourself as a professional. And I am a CPRS as well, which is cool, but it's really important to be able to use your time wisely. So if you're invited to a space, get educated on what the space is. I go and I research who I'm going to be with, which I already knew all these and they rock. But who I'm going to be talking with, what are we going to be talking about, and really getting educated. And I didn't do that early on. I was like, give us money and save lives and all that, which is super radical and cool. But now it's more professional and being able to get my point across without bringing up so much of my past. Like, this is the solution, kind of drop the mic stuff is really what I like to do, and it's my jam, and really be open about who I am, because life is way too short and humans are dying around us every single day. So I think it's important to not just recover out loud, but teach those, that come in behind you how to do so. And that's what we do at McShen. Our team rocks. We got a couple young ladies here today. And, being able to reduce the rage, because I know at least one of them have seen me kind of enraged. It's hard. McShen is, if it's your job, this is home away from home. Like, this is family, at our organization, and my office is pink, and it's just my home away from home. And, it's also, as a leader, I have to remember how to get through that and how to teach the individual behind me, how to work through the rage. And exercise is my Peloton, and shadow boxing is my jam. So taking care of my mental health and my physical health and my recovery is how I can walk into these places and speak on the behalf of the humans that we serve and, the community at large. So that's a big part of my recovery, is exercising and getting it all out in the morning, so I can rock throughout the day. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I would say I'm not in a professional advocacy position at all. And as a writer, I try to use attraction rather than promotion. I really stay away from telling people what they should do. And I've definitely had students in classes write, and I'm like, oh my God, they're such an alcoholic. And I want to just tell them that and then tell them to come to a meeting with me and stuff. But I found that if I write about my own experience instead, I've had people approach me, and it's come through them rather than me trying to drag them along. I have also found that the more openly I share, the better I feel over time. And alcoholism and drug addiction is only one aspect of things that I've gone through and experienced that I have had a lot of shame around. The more I write about that and the more I share it publicly on my blog, on my website, in books, the less shame I carry around. And then people do feel free to approach me to talk about things that maybe they've never talked to anyone else about before because of that. And now when I go to speak or teach workshops, I always share that I'm in recovery. Last November, it was with Virginia State probation and parole officers. I did a creative writing conference with them, or workshop at their conference, and I didn't know like how the hell that was going to go. But everybody there, it was like they were starving to tell the truth about their own lives and to write what was really going on with them behind the scenes. And people were crying and hugging each other. And it was like people are desperate to tell the truth, but they don't feel they have permission to do it. So when I start a class by telling kind of all my shit right up front, everyone else is more likely to do it as well. And I'll pass.
All right, thank you all so much. We're out of time, so we're going to end it here. So let's have a round of applause for our guests and this fantastic panel.